There are wars that rewrite the history books, conflicts everyone knows, etched into collective memory with monuments, films, solemn commemorations. And then there are the others. The wars buried in silence. Tragedies so devastating that the world chose to look away. Genocides disguised as battles. Nations erased from the map while Europe danced in its gaslit ballrooms. Today, we dig into one of these mass graves of memory. A story of blind ambition, of children sent to die with fake beards, of an entire people who chose annihilation over surrender. It all began with a single gunshot on a forgotten riverbank, and it ended with 90% of a nation's men dead. Welcome back to Forgotten Frontlines. March 1st, 1870. A single gunshot echoes across the Aquitaban River in northeastern Paraguay. The bullet finds its mark, striking Marshal Francisco Solano Lopez in the back of the head as he thrashes through the shallows, desperately trying to reach the far bank. His final words, uttered moments before, "I die with my homeland." He wasn't exaggerating. In 6 years of war, Paraguay lost 2/3 of its entire population. Of the roughly 500 to 25,000 Paraguayans who existed in 1864, only 221,000 remained by 1871. Of those survivors, a mere 28,000 were adult men, 90%. This is the story of the War of the Triple Alliance, Latin America's bloodiest conflict, a war so catastrophic that it nearly erased an entire nation from the map. A war triggered by one man's delusions of grandeur. A war where children fought with fake beards and rusty bayonets against professional armies. This is a story the world has forgotten. Until now. Act 1. The Architect of Ruin. To understand how Paraguay walked willingly into oblivion, you need to understand Francisco Solano Lopez. In his 20s, Lopez spent 18 months touring Europe, a journey that would poison his mind with impossible ambitions. In the glittering court of Napoleon III, he became intoxicated with martial splendor, the gold braid, the grand parades, the imperial pomp. He returned home with steamships to fill Paraguay's embryonic navy, crates of guns and ammunition, and something far more dangerous, an Irish adventuress named Eliza Lynch, who fed his outsized ego and encouraged his delusions of grandeur. By 1864, Lopez had crowned himself the protector of the equilibrium of the La Plata. He'd built a 50,000-man army, the strongest in Latin America, and he was looking for a fight. The trigger was almost absurdly petty. When Brazil began interfering in Uruguay's internal politics, supporting the Colorado faction against the ruling Blancos, Lopez took it as a personal insult. He demanded Brazil cease its meddling. Brazil ignored him. Lopez's response? In November 1864, he seized the Brazilian merchant ship Marcos de Olinda in Asunción Harbor and threw the governor of Mato Grosso, who happened to be aboard, into a dungeon. 1 month later, he invaded Brazilian territory, capturing the mineral-rich but poorly defended province of Mato Grosso. But Lopez wasn't done. He demanded that Argentina grant him passage through Corrientes province so he could march south to save Uruguay. When Argentine President Bartolomé Mitre refused, Lopez abandoned all reason. On April 13, 1865, he declared himself Marshal of Paraguay and granted himself extraordinary war powers. 5 days later, he declared war on Argentina, captured 2 Argentine naval vessels, and occupied the town of Corrientes. The response was swift. Argentina, Brazil, and newly Colorado-controlled Uruguay secretly formed the Triple Alliance on May 1st, 1865, with a chilling objective: overthrow Paraguay's government and leave it with no arms or elements of war. Francisco Solano Lopez, with his gold braid and Napoleonic fantasies, had just declared war on three neighbors simultaneously. The genocide of Paraguay was about to begin. June 11th, 1865. The Bay of Riachuelo on the Paraná River. Lopez, despite his complete ignorance of naval tactics, personally ordered an attack against the Brazilian fleet. At dawn, Commodore Pedro Ignacio Meza led 9 Paraguayan vessels, armed with a total of 36 disparate guns, against 9 Brazilian ships mounting 59 superior cannons. The Paraguayans fought with desperate courage, attempting to board enemy vessels in hand-to-hand combat. The Brazilian ship Jequitinhonha was sunk. Parnaíba was boarded, her decks running red as sailors fought with cutlasses and pistols. But superior Brazilian firepower decided the day. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, just 4 hours after engaging, Meza limped back to Humitá Fortress with 5 of his 9 ships lost. He died of his wounds days later. The defeat sealed Paraguay's fate. With the rivers blocked and Allied forces outnumbering them 10-1, Lopez's troops were forced into a grinding defensive war. May 24th, 1866, the Battle of Tuyuti, the largest battle of the war. Against all military logic, Lopez ordered his troops to attack entrenched Allied positions through swamp-choked terrain under the merciless noonday sun. They had virtually no artillery support. Wave after wave of Paraguayans slogged through reed-choked thickets as Allied cannons opened fire. For every yard gained, entire ranks were decimated. Those who reached the Allied positions were blasted apart by withering rifle volleys. By day's end, 6,000 Paraguayans lay dead. Another 6,000 were wounded. In a single afternoon, Lopez had thrown away an entire army. His response? Apoplectic defiance. He withdrew to fortified positions at Curuzu and Curupeti, where he would make his enemies pay in blood. September 22nd, 1866. The Allied assault on Curupeti. After a day-long naval bombardment, 5 columns of Allied troops advanced at midnight against 5,000 Paraguayan defenders in 2 trench lines. The Allies breached the first trench, then bogged down in the moat behind it. Paraguayan artillery and riflemen poured devastating fire into the trapped invaders. When dawn broke, the Allies had lost 1/5 of their attacking force, thousands of men, while the Paraguayan casualties numbered just 54. The humiliation was so complete that both Argentine President Mitre and Uruguayan President Flores abandoned the front, taking most of their troops with them. Only 4,000 Argentines and 200 Uruguayans remained to fight alongside Brazil, but the Allies had limitless reinforcements. Lopez did not. By 1867, Paraguay's army was no longer an army. It was a collection of old men, emaciated boys, and skeletal shadows of the soldiers who had marched north 2 years earlier. The river blockade, in effect since 1865, had choked Paraguay completely. Lopez's troops scavenged unexploded Brazilian shells from the mud. They dragged captured ordnance back from no man's land during nighttime forays. They fought with whatever they could carry. In November 1867, the new Allied commander, Brazilian General Luis Alves de Lima e Silva, the Marquis de Caxias, completed the encirclement of Humitá Fortress. For months, the Paraguayan garrison held. Then, on March 3, 1868, Lopez retreated in the dead of night with up to 12,000 men, abandoning 3,000 defenders with orders to resist to the last man. Their commander shot himself. The second in command held out until August, when he attempted evacuation under darkness. Humitá fell. More than half his soldiers were already dead, but the true horror was still to come. December 6, 1868, the bridge at Itororo River. Lopez sent Colonel Bernardino Caballero with 5,000 conscripts to hold the bridge against Caxias's advancing army. When the Paraguayans ran out of ammunition, they charged with machetes and rusty bayonets in a suicidal attack. When the Brazilians inspected the enemy dead, they realized with horror that a sickening number were boys no older than 15. Many of the Brazilian soldiers wept. December 11th, the Battle of Avaí. Lopez's remaining forces, now comprised almost entirely of old men and children as young as 13 or 14, faced Caxias's army in torrential rain. Whole battalions of untrained barefoot boys were thrown against battle-hardened veterans. For nearly 4 hours, these adolescents fought with the obstinacy of youth. They refused all quarter. They received no mercy. Only a few hundred survived. Over 3,000 were cut down. Throughout his steady collapse, Lopez's paranoia metastasized into pure madness. Convinced of conspiracies and fifth columnists, he rounded up cabinet ministers, judges, military officers, priests, and diplomats, hundreds of Paraguay's leading citizens, and had them summarily shot. He turned on his own family, executing his brothers and brothers-in-law for treason. Women were forced at bayonet point to carry ammunition through the malarial jungle. Those who couldn't keep pace were left to die. By March 1870, Count Du's 27,000 fresh Brazilian troops had chased Lopez across the country for months. At the hamlet of Piribabai, they surrounded his final army, mostly women and Shanghai children, and subjected them to general bombardment. 700 defenders died. Lopez escaped again. But at the Aquidauban River, his luck finally ran out. When the shooting stopped, Paraguay was a ghost country. Between 300,000 and 1.2 million people dead. Estimates vary, but even the lowest figures represent apocalyptic losses. 90% of adult men were gone. Entire generations had been erased. Brazil and Argentina annexed 55,000 square miles of Paraguayan territory. They demanded massive indemnities that were never paid, but occupied the country until 1876. The scars never healed. Today, Paraguay has the highest inequality of land ownership in the world. 85% of agricultural land is held by just 2.5% of owners. At least 14% of Paraguayan land is in Brazilian hands. The lopsided Itaipu Treaty has cost Paraguay an estimated $75 billion in lost revenue since 1985. And Francisco Solano Lopez, the architect of national suicide, his image appears on currency. Cities name their main avenues after him. The president holds office in the Lopez Palace. As historian Harrowing Caballero observed, no other Latin American country has gone through what Paraguay experienced. That's why it has left such a strong mark on the Paraguayan collective consciousness. The War of the Triple Alliance was proportionally one of the costliest conflicts in human history. A nation that chose annihilation over surrender, led by a dictator who mistook himself for Napoleon. And the world has almost completely forgotten it happened. The riverbanks of the Aquidauban are quiet now. But if you listen carefully, you can still hear the echoes of that final gunshot, the sound of a nation dying. This was Forgotten Frontlines, where we uncover the wars the world chose to forget. If you want to explore more battles lost to history, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications. Drop a comment below. What forgotten conflict should we cover next? Until next time, remember, just because history forgot doesn't mean we should.